Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a completely different and frankly sometimes unsettling way of looking at why we do what we do with our money. If you've ever looked at your bank account and felt totally baffled by your own decisions, you are absolutely not alone. We're not doing generic budgeting tips today, and we're not doing shallow motivational advice either. Instead, we're exploring the intense psychological roots of human behavior, uncovering those hidden truths that most of us never consciously notice about our relationship with wealth. Okay, picture this. It's 1:43 a.m. The room is totally dark except for that cold blue glow coming from your phone screen. You're scrolling endlessly. You're buying another gadget, or maybe it's that third pair of shoes that you definitely do not need. And for a split second, it actually feels like your life just became lighter. Right in that glowing moment, the anxiety fades, the loneliness quiets down, and you just feel this surge of comforting anticipation. But then, the package arrives. And the moment it does, that excitement completely vanishes. It's instantly replaced by this crushing weight, guilt, anxiety, a profound emptiness, regret, confusion. You get this intense emotional whiplash, wondering how something that felt literally life-saving in the middle of the night now just feels like a physical, boxed-up manifestation of your own failure. And that inevitably leads to the question you end up whispering to yourself in the dark: why do I keep doing this to myself? Well, what's truly fascinating is that the answer has absolutely nothing to do with your financial literacy. It's not your intelligence, and it's not your work ethic. You are not just lazy, and you aren't just bad at math.
Listen to this, because this is the paradigm shift. Most destructive financial behaviors are not logical problems. They are the profound, unconscious survival strategies of your nervous system. Your money issues are deeply rooted in emotional survival. And until we understand that, we're just putting Band-Aids on symptoms and completely ignoring the gaping wound underneath.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that when you experience trauma, or even just chronic low-grade instability, your brain fundamentally changes. Money stops being just math or currency. It transforms. It becomes your protection. It becomes an emotional relief, like a sedative for your burnout. It becomes your identity, your control, your escape. When your nervous system feels like it's literally fighting to survive, every dollar you spend is really just an attempt to buy a feeling of safety.
Which brings us to Section 1, the invisible programming of childhood.
We have to peel back the layers of how a child's brain processes instability and fear way before they ever earn a paycheck or open a savings account. Look, a child doesn't understand economics, right? But a child absolutely understands fear. And here is an uncomfortable truth we have to face. The adult often forgets the original emotional wound, but the nervous system never does. You might not consciously remember your parents arguing over bills or the subtle emotional neglect or that pervasive feeling of scarcity, but your nervous system kept the receipt. It learned the world is unsafe, security is incredibly fragile, and it turned that childhood scarcity into your adult financial conditioning. To really wrap our heads around this, we need to look at the neurobiology. Let's start with your amygdala. This is your brain's fear detector. In an unstable childhood environment, it becomes hyperactive. It's constantly scanning the room for threats. Fast forward to adulthood, and your amygdala has learned to treat a low bank account balance or even just opening your banking app with the exact same visceral panic as a physical, life-threatening attack. You aren't just stressed. Your body literally believes it's in mortal danger.
And then, of course, there's dopamine. We always call it the reward chemical, but in this context, it's the escape chemical. When you click buy at 1 a.m., you aren't actually purchasing happiness. You are buying a temporary neurological interruption of your pain. Dopamine is driven by the anticipation. It's a fleeting chemical distraction from loneliness and insecurity that just evaporates the second the transaction is complete.
Finally, we've got cortisol, the stress hormone. If you have lived with chronic stress or trauma, your cortisol basically stays elevated for years, and this literally weakens your brain's emotional regulation and impulse control. It basically forces your brain to prioritize immediate emotional relief today over your long-term financial stability tomorrow. You aren't making irrational choices because you're foolish. Your survival-focused brain is screaming for instant relief.
Moving right along to Section 2, the disguises of trauma spending.
So how do these brain chemicals actually play out in our everyday lives? Well, here's the clinical taxonomy of our financial pain. Status spending? That's not about the luxury car. That's emotional armor crying out, please see my value. Comfort spending is just a sedative for your burnout. Scarcity spending is driven by the sheer terror that everything you have might disappear tomorrow. You aren't just stress ordering takeout or buying designer clothes. You are actively buying a feeling to compensate for profound internal exhaustion. And then there's the most unsettling one of the whole bunch: self-sabotage. Familiarity feels safer than change, even when the familiarity is painful. This explains so much. It perfectly explains why people unconsciously destroy their own financial progress. For some folks, blowing their savings or racking up crazy credit card debt actually feels emotionally safer than maintaining stability. Why? Because chaos is the only home their nervous system has ever known. Peace feels terrifying.
And that drops us right into Section 3, the poverty of shame.
As this cycle spins completely out of control, we hit the absolute rock bottom of our psychological descent. We can literally map out this invisible trap step by step. It starts with a financial problem, which spikes your stress. So what do? You avoid it. You let the mail pile up, you delete the banking app. That total avoidance leads to worsening consequences, which breeds a deepening, toxic shame, which, you guessed it, only triggers more avoidance. You aren't financially irresponsible, you are emotionally overwhelmed and trapped in a downward spiral.
And this brilliantly shows exactly why standard self-help fails so many people. Traditional advice says, hey, just budget strictly, restrict your spending. But for a traumatized nervous system, forced restriction is perceived as a massive threat. It just rips open old childhood wounds of deprivation and punishment. Your nervous system feels backed into a corner, violently rebels, and you end up binge spending again. You simply cannot shame a survival mechanism into submission.
So, how do we fix this? Let's get into Section 4, rewiring your nervous system.
Now that we've diagnosed the hidden emotional roots and looked at the neuroscience, how do we actually climb our way out of survival mode? It starts with radical, absolutely non-judgmental awareness. What did you learn about money growing up? What emotions actually show up when you spend or when you save? What financial fears absolutely dominate your thoughts? By asking yourself these incredibly revealing questions, you start to figure out what you emotionally inherited. You bring the unconscious stuff out into the light.
You also have to learn to regulate before you make a decision. That's another vital step. By forcing a 24-hour pause before a purchase, you are doing something incredibly powerful. You are literally driving a wedge of safety between your raw triggered emotion and your financial action. You are giving your hyperactive amygdala the time it desperately needs to stand down and realize, okay, wait, I am not actually in danger.
Because here's the uncomfortable truth. External purchases cannot permanently create internal peace. The big takeaway here is untangling your identity and your sense of safety from your bank account. You have to realize that you cannot buy your way to psychological stability. Without building that inner safety through boundaries, purpose, and self-respect, external wealth is rarely ever going to feel like enough.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, breaking the generational cycle.
As we start to establish these new, healthy emotional experiences through repetition, we are doing something far more profound than just balancing our budgets. There is a powerful realization you have to make. This pattern did not begin with me. Generational poverty and financial chaos are almost always emotional long before they are economic. The minute you realize your scarcity panic, your fear of failure, and your financial shame were passed down to you through survival conditioning, you immediately regain your power. Awareness is what interrupts the inheritance.
If you take nothing else away from this explainer, let it be this: you were never just bad with money. You were carrying deeply ingrained emotional survival strategies straight into adulthood. The overspending, the chaos, the avoidance, they were all just desperate attempts to regulate pain that literally no one ever taught you how to properly process.
Because healing your finances ultimately isn't about the math at all. It's about looking inward, building genuine, lasting stability, and finally asking yourself this one deeply transformative question: is your nervous system finally safe enough to stop surviving? It's a heavy realization, but honestly, it is exactly where true financial freedom begins.